They say that the tree of loving will shine on me again. They say it grows on the bank of the river of suffering. Shine on me again. Yeah. Weep me the sunshine out of the falling rain. Weep me the hope of a new tomorrow. Fill my cup again.
Okay, so what we have here is a picture of what is known as the Wabanaki area. And then what does Wabanaki mean? The Wabanaki Confederacy consists of the following First Nations, indigenous groups. They are the Abenaki, Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot. And they inhabit basically the area of New England, Atlantic Canada. Now, the names on this map, this is an older map, so these are the settler colonial names of these groups that they used to use. For example, Maliseet was used for years and years. When I first started studying baskets and indigenous culture, we used Maliseet as well. And Passamaquoddy is a traditional settler name. Now, when the early Europeans first came and settled this area of Atlantic Canada, or Atlantic Canada in general, they did bring baskets with them. They brought them from New England or Europe, but they were really poor quality. They were just not made with a lot of skill, so they were very poor. Now, when they came and settled this area, they discovered that the Wabanaki were making baskets of a much better quality than they could themselves. So they stopped making baskets and they started trading with the people that lived in the Wabanaki area. So many of the baskets that were first traded were work baskets, such as potato baskets, apple baskets, nose baskets, cultivating baskets, seed broadcasting baskets, berry baskets, wool baskets, cheese strainers, and general purpose baskets. They were all traded to be working baskets. Now, basket making was a winter task, and they would make the baskets in the winter when they were in camping, and then they would trade it in the warmer months. And the men, they did most of the heavy work when it comes to making the baskets. They had to harvest the ash. Most of the baskets are made with black ash, which is getting harder and harder to find now. But the men had to harvest this ash. And then they made the splints. The splints are the horizontal parts of the baskets. So the men would harvest the ash. They would pound the ash to separate the splints. Then they would make the splints. For the women who did the next part of the basket making, they dyed the splints, and then they wove the splints and formed the baskets. And when it comes to quill work, women did most all of the quill work containers. It takes really tiny hands to do quill work, so I can see why it would be something definitely that the women could undertake. Now, in the 1860s, and this is according to an historical account, local people could purchase Huron baskets, Mi'kmaq baskets, Wolastoqey baskets, and they could purchase or trade them on the St. Mary's Reserve. So there's accounts of this actually going on. Okay. Now, Wabanaki baskets after 1870. There became, in the 1860s and 70s, when the railroads started going through the Maritimes, they started to have what they call tourism centers. A good example of that is St. Andrews, which is still a tourism center. And the people that were coming to these tourism centers, tourists, they wanted something that they could take as a memento back with them. And they were wanting not work baskets, cheese strainers, things like that. They were wanting something fancier. So they were wanting fancier baskets. And this is the Victorian era. they collected a lot of things that, well, I guess you could say were kind of useless. They were just decorative. So this is kind of the thing they were looking for to decorate their homes with, to show that I went to St. Andrews and I traded with this group of indigenous, and look what I brought back. So there was a need and a desire for these baskets. Now, also after 1870, there is the tools used to make baskets are becoming more sophisticated. There was a tool called a gauge, and I'll have a picture of it for those online later, and I've got one on the table. And basically, what the gauge did was to split the splints into a more finer, more uniform strip, and which made them more consistent. And at the same time, the indigenous were using what were called molds or forms. And these are mostly wooden, and I have some also on the table and some pictures later for those online. And this meant that they could make smaller, more intricate baskets, and they were also more uniform. So if you get one size, you're probably going to get a lot more the same size. And also there was an introduction of chemical dyes, which really helped the dyeing of these baskets. So you start to see a lot more deeper colors, more unusual colors, more color fast colors that didn't fade in the sunlight or were damaged by rain or moisture. And on this picture here, you see, and it's entitled Indians, the colonial settler name, making baskets near Bathurst. And here you see a man, a woman, and a child. And as I said, the traditional role, the man is sitting there making the splints, nice narrow splints. This is probably after 1870, I'm pretty sure. While the woman is doing the weaving with her hands. And it looks like, I couldn't confirm because there wasn't enough detail, but it looks like she was using a mold. And the child down at the woman's feet is probably also helping up the basket making, because children were taught very, very young how to make these baskets. They were assisting. So this child, maybe it looks like he's playing with the basket, but he could also be making some part of the basket. That was his task. All right. And this picture, you can find it at the Provincial Archives. It's part of their collection. And if you're interested, reach out. I can give you the number. Now, oops, birch bark containers. Now, you can make more baskets from an ash tree than you can from the birch tree, or more containers from the birch tree. And birch containers are also more fragile, definitely more fragile. But the advantage of birch bark containers is that you can incorporate more design on them. And you could do this by etching, by burning, by dyeing. And as you see in this example, it's got some real elaborate symbols, flowers of some kind. And so these, a lot of them could be useful, but they weren't designed for heavy work. For example, at King's Landing, we have a couple birch bark containers that were used to, a long time ago, collect maple sap. They acted as sap buckets. So they did have a working purpose, but they weren't designed to hold anything heavy. They became very fragile as they got older, of course, maybe not at the time. And as the 19th century wore on, most birch bark wasn't going into container making. It was going into making canoes and shelters. So there was more of a demand to make canoes, shelters than there was to make birch bark containers. So if you find birch bark containers in fairly good shape, they're probably mid or earlier in the 19th century. And this example you see here on the screen or online, we collected this at King's Landing in 1969. And this container was collected from New River Beach. So it is possibly, and this is one of those attributed to Pescamacati, because that's the area that they inhabited. Quill work containers or boxes. This was definitely a trade product. They were made they weren't made for any kind of working. They were made for trade, for decoration, hold trinkets and things like that. And quill work is only done by the Mi'kmaq. They weren't done by the other indigenous groups in the Wabanaki Nation. So just the Mi'kmaq. And now this came from a source. I don't know if this can be confirmed, but the source said that no quill work was being done in Cape Breton, Newfoundland, or PEI because they didn't have porcupines there. So I thought, well, I don't know. Maybe it's true. So, or maybe there wasn't enough of them to make quill work boxes. Now, porcupines themselves have over 30,000 quills on their, and they were harvested, of course, after the porcupine had become deceased. And once the indigenous craftsmen gathered up all of these 30,000 quills, or as many as they could gather, they were sorted into size. And then each category of size was bathed in a different dye, so different colors. Quill work is usually attached to birch bark. I think I've never seen an example not attached to birch bark. And the birch bark that it was attached to was best harvested in the summer. Now, first, the birch bark that it's attached to and the quills were soaked. I'm not sure if that's before or after the dye process. And then the craftsman used an awl, which is a very sharp tool, to make two small holes parallel to each other. And you would take the two ends of the quill and you would tuck them into the two holes. And they did that with every single quill you see here. So it's a lot of work. And that's why I believe that mostly women did this type of work because of the size of their hands. And quill work didn't just come in containers, excuse me. It was also attached to boxes, chair backs, or sometimes other decorative parts of furniture. And quill work was intensely hard on the eyes of the craftsmen to do all this fine work. So after about the 1900s, it wasn't viable for craftsmen to make them because they weren't getting enough return on the trade investment. So they became much, much less known after the 1900s. Now, we have two examples here from our collection. The upper left is from the Ganong family, and this is part of the Ganong family that settled in Digby, Nova Scotia, so, home of the Mi'kmaq. And it's in our collection as well. And the second example in the lower right came from the Fisher family of Point de Butte, so much closer towards the Nova Scotia border. So they're both mostly trinket boxes. Now, for those of you online, the size is hard to gauge. I should have used a measuring comparison. But the little one on the top left is really tiny. It's a really tiny, tiny quill work box. Whereas the quill work box in the lower right is much bigger. It's quite a good size. And it might have had a lid at one time. We didn't get the lid. Now, all right. So I want to discuss a little bit about basket making tools and how to make the baskets themselves. Now, the material for baskets is, of course, the black ash tree, sometimes other kinds of ashes, but mostly black ash. The birch tree, of course, sweetgrass, and twigs were all used in making baskets. Now, the tools used for making baskets are gauges, as I mentioned earlier, and the picture of a gauge is on your left-hand side. It's hard to see, and I've got it over here at the table for those in person. Most of these examples are on the table here. It's got little sharp steel teeth on the very top of it, and that is what the craftsman would draw it through to make the different strips. So the gauge was very useful in the making of baskets. And a mold, and I've got an example on the right-hand side of a basket mold. They're usually made of wood. And again, for those of you in person, I have them over here on the table. And both of them were primarily introduced after 1870. Now, the components of a basket are the standards. They're the vertical splints, the up and down. Now, and the weavers wind in and out of the standards. And the hoop is attached to the top, and then it's sewn on or woven on. And the binding, which is the lacing that wrapped around the hoop. So those are the four components of most every basket. And the covers for baskets, a lot of them have covers. They weren't made on molds. They were made freehand. Now, the splints before you made the baskets had to be soaked to make them pliable, make them easier to use. And sweetgrass, which is commonly used in this area, but it's not used on baskets that were made to hold food, like potato baskets or apple baskets, because the heavy smell of the sweetgrass transfers to the food. So traditionally, they weren't used for like the heavy baskets with that you would gather food in. And ash was gathered year round, but sweetgrass, of course, is only gathered in its growing season. And the ash baskets were the quickest to make as opposed to the birch bark or the quill work. Now, some popular designs on baskets include periwinkle. It's a little bit of it's also called a curl. It's a little curl decorative addition. Porcupine quills often have a decorative element and designs. And diamonds. Diamonds appear on a lot of the birch bark containers, the quillwork boxes as well. And the ash tree has to be, of course, harvested. And then when you harvest the ash tree, you pound the log that you've harvested with a mallet. And the ash that you use is from the annual rings. Everybody's taken a cross section of a log and seen the annual growth rings. They only use the ash from the rings because, and this is according to one source, the bugs only eat the wood in between the rings. So you wanted to have them bug free. And to be honest, of all the baskets we have at King's Landing, I've never really seen any evidence of bugs eating our baskets. They don't nibble on it like they love textiles, of course, and rugs, but not the baskets. So I think they were onto something. And 10 to 20 baskets could be made from one mature ash tree. Now, the gauge that we have on the left came from Donald McDonald, and we collected it in 1975. And the molds, we got a set of molds in 1994. Good. Okay. Engagement with the First Nations communities. And this is kind of how I got started on our basket and studying our basket collection. In 2022, I applied for a MAP grant, a digitization stream, and that's with Canadian Heritage, and I was successful. But I applied through the lens of collections management. What we were going to do, and Chelsea was there in the audience, was with me on that journey. She can attest. I needed her help. Our intention was to photograph every basket and container in our collection, describe it, and then we were going to share this as a resource online along with the stories associated with it. And the intention, and this is my lens of collections management, was to lessen the handling of these containers and baskets. So people could see them from near and far, but they didn't go through a lot of handling. So we did the photographs. We photographed, I think, most all of them. We also had a description of most all of them, like what they were made of, how big they were, their sizes, etc., what they were made of. And then come 2023, we got a new CEO at King's Landing, Travis Weber. And as he was catching up with me on this project, and he also had a background of Indigenous engagement from out west, the first question he asked me is, did we engage or consult with Indigenous communities first? Oops, no. I don't know why I never thought of that, but I was looking through the collections lens, not thinking about who the material culture actually was owned by. So we started a journey of engagement. 2024, the Department of Indigenous Affairs at Government New Brunswick helped us make contact with Willistic Nation of New Brunswick and their headquarters in Fredericton. And on May 1st, 2024, we had an engagement session. We invited the Willistic Nation. We invited the elders, the staff from Willistic Nation of New Brunswick, Department of Indigenous Affairs, and ourselves at King's Landing. And we had an engagement session and we really listened to them. I remember taking them for a tour of our storage center where our baskets are nicely stored, environmentally controlled, and drawers and everything. And the comment I heard a lot from the elders and the craftsmen in the community was they felt like their souls were being contained, that they were being trapped in this environment, in this storage environment, which is something I never thought about, of course, not being Indigenous and thinking about it that way. So one of their suggestions was to take the collection on the road, make it a traveling exhibit to the different reserves. But they also wanted to play a larger part in this resource. So they wanted to make sure that their language was represented in the resource. Their stories were being told through the resource. And they wanted to be partners with us in this. Now, how did we implement what we heard from this community? In 2025, we went back and forth with the Willistic Nation of New Brunswick. They had a change of staff, etc. And what we landed on was we developed a long-term contract. They were going to go and do oral interviews amongst their elders and basket makers. They were going to do the report. They were going to hear the stories. And then they were going to share this report with us. They own it and they will own it, but they're going to share it with us. But it's going to take 2 years or more to do it. So we anticipate that this contract will end in 2027. And that is why I mentioned an Indigenous exhibit coming back again in 2028, because by then we have the report and we can better do justice to their collection through an Indigenous exhibit. So this is getting close. So this is a picture after the engagement session of all of us that were there. And you might notice that they're holding the wampum belt in the front, which is an amazing, amazing belt and very traditional. And it represents sharing knowledge, sharing goals, and partnering. So we were very pleased when they honored us by bringing it to the meeting. Now, to King's Landing's collection specifically. In King's Landing, here are some of our working baskets. In your far left, we have what's called a nose basket, and this came from George Anderson in 1967. Now, a nose basket, and some people may already know this, I didn't until I saw it and was explained to me, is a basket. You take your horse and you go visiting somebody, or you go into the general store to do trade. So the horse is standing out there waiting for you, hitched to a post or whatever, like our store out back here. We know that happened. We've got the hitching post. So that poor horse could be waiting a while. So what the farmer would do is he would place oats in this basket, put the basket over the head or the nose of the horse and attach it through a leather or rope behind the horse's ear. So the horse could be munching away on these oats while he was waiting for the farmer. And I thought that was really practical. Good idea. Now, on your lower right, we have an apple picking basket, and this came from Marion Hoyt. The Hoyt family owned an apple orchard a large apple orchard in Prince William. And how you use this is while you're climbing the tree, you would take the basket with you, but it's hard to see, but it has a little metal hook that goes on the handle. And you can use this metal hook to a branch while you're up there getting your apples. So you'd have your hands free and have a place to put them. Now, the upper right is a little child's wool basket. We acquired this in 2007 from the Taylor Leak family, which is a Black New Brunswicker family locally. And what a little wool basket does is a child would go be searching along a fence line or along bushes, and they would be picking little tufts of the wool that the sheep left there as they were trying to climb over the fence or trying to weave through the bushes. And they would gather them into the little wool baskets so that nothing went to waste. All right. Oops. All right, now we go to the next part of our collection, which is the fancy baskets. Like I said earlier, fancy baskets, mostly after 1870, trade items. Some are practical, but most of them are decorative. They're useful, but they're not going to be out there using them on the farm. And you see on your middle bottom a little cradle. And this came from the Gordon collection. We got this collection in 2002. And it's probably for a doll because it is kind of tiny and it looks pretty fragile. We do have a bigger cradle in our collection that very much could have been used for a baby, but this is very popular. The little rockers in the bottom, most of them were replaced over the years. That they really were a lot of use. So we have a little doll's cradle. Now on the upper middle, we have a little trinket box, also from the Gordon collection. And as you can see, the colors inside are so vibrant, nice bright red, compared to the outside, which would have faded. Even chemical dyes fade over time. So often you can open up a basket and it's like, wow, that's the original color. It's really lovely. And the weave that you see on this little trinket basket is periwinkle or curl weave. Now, the basket on the lower left is a handkerchief basket and came from the Pickard collection. The Pickards were local in this area, and we collected them in 2003. And the handkerchiefs were stored in them, and they were just pulled out as needed. And the basket on your far right is a needle basket. It's kind of deceptive in size. I really should have used a ruler to compare the size with it, but it's really a lot shorter than it looks. Um, and they came in all different sizes, and they were, as I said, they were used for knitting needles, for hooks, crochet hooks, pins, whichever you wanted to use them for. And the final one, the upper left, is a wastebasket. And we collected this since 1966 in the Head Pond area. And also note the nice vibrant colors, the reds and the greens. I've never really was quite sure what wastebaskets were used back for in the 19th century because they didn't have a lot of waste. And so I'm really starting to, if anybody has any ideas, please share with me because I've always been kind of puzzled by what wastebaskets held. All right, our next slide is I'm going to deep dive a little bit more into our Pickard collection. Now, as I said, we started gathering the Pickard collection in 2003. And in 2004, we had an exhibit on the Pickard collection of baskets from at Old Government House, or I guess it's now Government House. And Catherine Pickard was the donor. Her brother was Charles Pickard. And Charles said that all of the baskets in this large or that they had owned were acquired by their grandfather, who died in 1923, and that their father, and they themselves had never collected these baskets. So, and to quote Charles Pickard, all them baskets were collected by grandfather before he died in 1923. Now, Stuart Smith, who was at the opening, Dr. Stuart Smith, he's known to some in this community. He's passed on, I believe now, or maybe he hasn't. He was also my thesis supervisor at UMB. But, he said that Catherine had said that the baskets were made by the Toma family from the Kingsclear Reserve. And Dr. Smith thought that the natives had camped on the Pickard land up until about the 1960s, and that the baskets could have dated as late as the 1960s. So that kind of contradicts what Charles has said. But when somebody had mentioned Charles's comments to Dr. Smith, he said that Charles would definitely know and he accepted his information. Now, the item on your left is what's called the comb basket, very decorative, fancy basket. We have a few of them in our collection, and they were simply to hold hair combs or combs to put your hair back. And the basket on your right is a purse. It's basically a fancy purse, a long handle. And just note the vibrant green colors. It's really beautiful. And we can deep dive into the Gordon collection. Oh, and I'll just go back to the Pickard collection. We gathered other parts of this collection over the years, not just in 2003. Now the Gordon collection, local collectors, local family, and they were donated in 2002. And the family history of these baskets, and it's very similar to the Pickards, is that the natives made them from the nearby Kingsclear Reserve, and they also harvested the ash from the Jewett property. So they're from the Jewett property, and in return, the natives gave the Jewett family baskets as sort of a token of exchange. Now, the one on the left is a work basket. It's a general purpose work basket for the farm. And the one on the right is also a work basket, general purpose, used for collecting your knitting, your sewing, whatever needlepoint, whatever you were working on. And we have other collections at King's Landing. We have the McManus collection. And the McManus was a local antique dealer. And surprise, a lot of these baskets came from the Pickard family. And this little trinket basket here, I want you to note, it's got either a ribbon or a splint across the top. And if you ever find a basket with the ribbon or the splint across the top, it's quite a gem, because that means it was never used. That means, because when they would sell them with these little strips across the top, and people would kind of break it so that they could actually use it for the trinkets. If you find one with that is still intact, it's quite a gem. All right. And on to other collections we have here at King's Landing. 2008, Owen Fowler, another antique dealer, donated some baskets. And these 11 baskets were assembled by the late Dr. Peter Paul of Woodstock, New Brunswick. And he had bought Dr. Paul's collection from his widow. And he also had several from the collection. And the ones that he donated to us represent the largest and the finest from this collection. And Dr. Peter Paul was recognized as an authority on holistic way culture. And he worked closely with Harvard University and the Smithsonian. And this collection really represents some rare example of 19th century baskets. And one of the baskets is on the upper left. It's a large work basket. I was going to bring it with me until I realized that large really means large. And I was like, I don't think I could fit it in my car. So it's still in the collection. And in 2008 was the first time that we had 3 different sizes of birch bark containers come from the same donor. And this is represented by the one on the upper right. And that's one of the sizes. And this is from the Tracy family of Tracy, New Brunswick. And so we don't know who made them. The information came to us, they came from the Tracy family, but we don't know the craftsman. Now, the birch bark container in the lower left was made by Chief Arthur Pulchis of Kingsclear Reserve, and he was made for our Bayard Simmons and from Fredericton, and we acquired that one in 1991. Now, the final one on your lower right is a little rattle. It's quite a gem, and we have a lot about the history on this little rattle. It was owned by George Randolph Christie, who is the cousin of Etta Esty Brewer. And Etta was the grandmother of Maxine Morehouse, who has also donated objects to the collection here at the Keswick Ridge. And George Christie was the son of George, people like to repeat names and family, George and Ann Christie, and he was born in 1882. So this rattle goes quite far back, and it's in such great condition. It's like, I think they probably didn't let the child chew on it or play with it, because it definitely shows no sign of being actively used by a child. It's a very beautiful gem. All right. And in conclusion, why do we study baskets and containers? And what does it teach us? Well, first, it's important because it teaches us the individual expression that was used in making these baskets. And no two items are truly alike. They're all different, even if they were made on molds. And each maker expresses a part of themselves in the design and the form of the basket and container. It also teaches us about the economic interdependency and the trade of goods that was essential for the survival of both the indigenous population and the non-indigenous. It also teaches us about the use and respect of the natural resources. The indigenous people only took what they needed, and they knew how to only take what they needed and not destroy the whatever they were taking from. They really respected nature. Now, it's also important, it teaches us about the passing down of knowledge from both indigenous and non-indigenous makers. And the knowledge is passed down mostly through storytelling and seeing the item being created. People still make baskets today. And the non-indigenous sharing of how they acquired the baskets, like from the Pickard family or the Gordon family or the McManus, what they have passed down, the knowledge they have passed down to us. Also teaches us the importance of community relationships, respect and encouragement, and sharing the resources. And also about the change in technology from the before 1870, making baskets free form, to after 1870, having more specialized tools to make them more uniform. And basically, baskets and birch bark containers, quillwork boxes, they really, when plastics was introduced into the economy, you don't see many of them being produced. They just weren't profitable. People were getting containers and things they could use in the farm cheaper from factories, from using plastics, or from the mass use of wood. So the indigenous, even though they still kept up the tradition, they weren't using it very much as trade goods because they weren't getting much investment from it. So the production of basket containers really died down after that period of time. And finally, the gender division of making these baskets, the men doing the hard work of getting the ash and the splints, the women doing the fine work. So those are just a few things that we can learn from studying baskets. Now that ends my presentation, but we can open it up for questions online or in person. And for those of you in person, feel free to come over to the table with me afterwards and look at these baskets. You can handle all of them except for the quillwork boxes because they're so fragile, but I can show them to you.
We also have a few in our collection that are on display. I'm sure you should come in, so have a peek.
Yeah. Yours mostly came from the Sloat family, I believe. Yeah. Quiet bunch.
When you mentioned the wastebasket of what it would actually
Yeah.
for, I was thinking like maybe pieces of thread, pieces of yarn that were too small to be used, like there were, the ends, maybe pieces of cloth from the clothing that was too small for anything. And then when the basket got full, it would actually be used for the stuffing of something.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. And suggestions like that help us in our interpretation of them, because now we were placing them a lot in the offices at King's Landing. We're thinking, somebody doing office work would have a waste basket, but now I can see them more close to somebody that's in a drawing room or a bedroom creating their sewing or sewing rooms. And yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah.
I like the way you got everyone together from all the departments.
Yeah.
I find so often.
Oh, the indigenous engagement.
Knows what the other ones are doing or anything else. And now I have to leave.
Okay, sure.
I have to go to pickleball.
Well, I'm glad you came.
But
I'm going to email you.
Okay.
There's a bunch of other comments I want to make.
Sure, yeah, my email is there, or you can find it.
Sorry, I have the.
No, feel free to reach out. I love it with questions. And yeah, and there's a whole presentation I also do about lessons I've learned with Indigenous engagement and consultation. One thing that comes really to mind is patience and time. It's their time, not ours. I mean, we won't end this engagement. We won't end it ever, really. But the report won't be coming out until 2027, and we start engaging with them in 2024. So yeah, patience and time.
Got a question online from someone who wants to know if King's Landing is still doing workshops for people who want to learn how to make baskets.
I don't know if there's a basket making workshop coming up. We do workshops. Not this season, at least. There are basket makers out there, and a lot of them are Indigenous and still in the community, but they're also very much in demand. So it's really, they run their own workshops primarily, and they're very successful. So unfortunately, no. I'd love to see them making it. I probably wouldn't attempt one myself, but quite a bunch. Nancy?
I'm really amazed at the color of that basket.
The wastebasket, yeah.
And, and some baskets are sort of faded, so what determines?
How they were used and how they were stored. You're never going to see, I can't say never, but you're not going to usually see dyes and intricate work on work baskets. You just have plain hardy weaves and standards, and but things, trinket boxes, things that weren't used that much except for display. If they were placed, say, in direct sunlight or with a big change of humidity, they could, especially the sunlight. The sunlight is a big killer of color and dyes. And the Pickard collection that we got, the story goes that most of them were just packed away in trunks because they got a lot of them from, the yearly exchange of the ash tree. So they were stored away. They didn't see the light of day. They weren't on display. They weren't used. So that meant that they came with a lot of their dyes intact. So yeah, it's and also if you ever get a basket, check the inside if it has a cover, and inside the colors will be so much more richer. You'll see a lot more of the original colors than you would from, say, the outside.
The Gordon collection was stored in an attic.
Oh, for there. And the attic, and Donna's son was a donor of it, correct? Kirby? Yeah. And yeah, stored in an attic because they were prized possessions, or they just already had a few and didn't need.
Well, they had so many because they traded with the Kingsclear Reserve with ash, which they would cut in the wintertime.
Okay.
Because
yeah.
it was easier to get it out of the woods than the snow.
True. Good point. Yeah. And if there was this yearly engagement, they would collect quite a few baskets, and you would always accept them because that's a sign of respect and exchange. So even if you had 100 of them in trunks or in your attic, you still would respect the trade and you would just accept them. Yeah. All right. Any more online, Russ? Or okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I think that's it, Ann, then. And
Please join us for coffee if you want to. Evelyn.
Excuse me, Evelyn.
did we hear somebody online?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's me, Jane Simpson.
Jane. Oh, yes. Okay.
Evelyn, in my research around Westfield, there's a lot of evidence that the First Nations would begin.
She is on the speaker. I can hear over here. Sorry, Jane, can you repeat?
Oh, sure. So in my research around Westfield, I've found that every year in the summer, First Nations would come and make baskets at the confluence of is it Narepisis and the St. John River. And so they would sell that to the tourists, and they would remain there when the railways came. But certainly, I've been to the museum in Fredericton, and I've looked at I think it's the Acadian place, and there are gorgeous baskets in there. And really, how did the Loyalists and the Acadians manage to settle? Because, well, certainly the Loyalists came with nothing, and where would they put all these things? So their trade with the First Nations must have really boosted the living of the Loyalists during that time.
Yeah, so Jane was mentioning in Westfield, at a junction of, I can't remember the name of the
Narapasus?
okay, that's a hard word, but somebody else got it.
It's probably not the right way to say it.
No, it's that they used to come and they would make the baskets at this juncture, and especially when the railway came through with the tourists. And then your second part of your question, Jane, was about the trade with the Loyalists and the Acadians, and
Well,
how-
when I visited the Fredericton Museum, and there's a room there where an Acadian woman speaks to you, and the First Nations artifacts in that room, because they traded a lot with First Nations. And so you look at all this bounty and you realize this is part of the Loyalists' ability to survive, because they were able to somehow trade with the First Nations and get these things. Because, I'm trying to put together that settler's house that you took pictures for me, and there's absolutely nothing in it because they didn't come with anything. But now, I know that First Nations came up the lake and they probably traded on some. And so these beautiful baskets would start appearing in these settlers' huts. So
yeah,
very useful.
yeah, it definitely was really important for the Loyalists and Acadians, because, like I said, Europeans came with baskets early on, but they weren't made that well. They didn't have the knowledge, so they would trade. Sometimes they could be trading, like the Pickards and the Jewetts, for the use of their land for the baskets, the natural resources, and the trade really increased after the establishment of reserves in New Brunswick, because that took away a lot of their traditional way of life, the hunting, the fishing. The hunting was decreasing. They weren't as mobile, so they needed to find another source of income for trade. And so when the reserve system was established, 1820s, 30s, that's when this trade really, really picked up out of necessity, basically. Okay. Yeah.
Are there any other online comments, questions?
All right. Thank you, everyone. It's been great. And yeah, well, thank you. Thank you.
Weave the sunshine out of the falling rain. Weave me the hope of a new tomorrow. Fill my cup once again. I'll weave.